This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit Open Tuition.
Page 23, Investor Relations and Potential Problems with Implementation. Directors should have regular dialogue with institutional investors. Let me have a quick look in the revision kit, see if I can find it. Question 7 on page 7. Sentosa House. Sonia. She's a fund manager, is an institutional investor. She's reviewing the annual report of one of the major companies in her portfolio. This company has recently undergone a number of board changes as a result of lack of confidence in its management from its major institutional investors, of which we are one. We are one of a number of major institutional investors. All right? The problem started 2 years ago when the chairman at Eastern Products, a man called Thomas, who started to pursue what the institutional investors regard as very risky strategies, whilst at the same time failing to comply with a stock market requirement on the number of non-execs. Sonia rang Eastern Investor Relations Department to ask why it was still not in compliance with the requirements relating to non-execs. She was told that Eastern Products was listed in a principles-based jurisdiction and the requirement was therefore not compulsory. It's simply that Eastern chose not to comply with that particular requirement. When she asked how its board committees could be made up with an insufficient number of non-execs, the investor relations manager said he didn't know. Incompetent? Delegated to someone who can't answer? What sort of investor relations manager is it? Investor relations department is it that can't answer something like this? And Sonia should contact the chairman directly. She was also told that there was no longer a risk committee because the chairman saw no need for one. Remember, we've just read that Thomas is a big risk taker. Just read in paragraph 1 that he's a person with a big risk appetite. Sonia telephoned Thomas, the chairman. She began by reminding him that Sentosa House was one of the main shareholders and currently we've got 13%. If we were the biggest one, it would have said Sentosa is the biggest institutional investor. So there's another one with at least 13%. So 2 investors have got 26% between them. She went on to explain that she had concerns over the governance of Eastern Products and should like Thomas to explain his non-compliance with some of the stock market requirements and also why he was pursuing strategies viewed by many as very risky. She and this other are a quarter of the shareholders. And the problem started 2 years ago. And she's just decided now to ring them up. What's happened to regular meetings, regular dialogue with institutional investors? Thomas reminded Sonia that Eastern has outperformed its sector in terms of earnings per share in both years since he's become chairman. And rather than question him, she should trust him to run the companies he saw fit. He thanked Sentosa for its support and rang off. Thank you for your support. Sonia's at fault. She's left it for 2 years. She's major board changes at the top of the company because they were not happy with the performance. This guy is chairman, he's powerful, he's chairman and chief exec, isn't he? Does it say he's chairman? Does it say he's chief executive as well? Does it say he's chief executive? A new chairman was appointed. Doesn't actually say that he's chief executive, but I think the implication is that it is because he's the one running the company. Doesn't actually use the words chief executive, but it's under his leadership that the company is taking these risks and achieving outperforming sector results. Shouldn't be. There should be 2 people. There should be 2 people at the top. No non-execs or incompetent non-execs. It doesn't say that there are none, but it does say there aren't enough. There's no risk committee. There's no balance of power at the top of the company. No competent non-executive directors to hold the activities of Thomas back. Surely, and even after less than half a day, Can you see that points are jumping out of that question at you? Can you? Can you see that points are jumping out? The question says, explain what an agency cost is. That's the cost of having directors. That's what an agency cost is. We'll have to fill it out to get 7 marks, but that's what it is. Describe with reference to the case the conditions under which it might be appropriate for an institutional investor to intervene in a company whose shares it holds. Well, it's got to act in a way which bears in mind the interests of all the shareholders, and some of those interests are the fact that the company will continue into the future. Thomas, being a major risk taker, is putting the company into an exposed position, and if he's possibly breaking the law, if he's possibly operating it on the basis of it being his own company and therefore running it for his own benefit, then they should be getting involved. They should be suggesting with other major shareholders that maybe we should remove Thomas. Evaluate the contribution that a risk committee made up of non-execs could make to Sonia's confidence in the management of Eastern Products. Well, we've not come across risk committees, I've not mentioned them, but I'm suggesting to all of you that you could probably have an attempt at that, suggesting the contribution that a risk committee. What do you think a risk committee does? Go on, what do you think they do? What do you think a remuneration committee does?
Sets remuneration.
Yeah, what do you think a risk committee does? Yeah, they assess the risk and they identify, hopefully, or delegate the responsibility for the identification and management of risk. I can't ask you what do you think an audit committee does, because they don't do an audit. That's not what their role is. Assess the opinion given to Sonia that because Eastern Products was listed in principles-based jurisdiction, compliance rules is not compulsory. Well, it's right, it's not compulsory. It's certainly advisable. Surely the combined code is indicative of best practice. And even though you're not obliged to follow it, it's good practice. So although it's not compulsory, we ought really to be seriously wondering why any of our invested companies is not complying with the combined code. So investor relations, directors should have regular dialogue. It's Sonia's fault. She's left it 2 years. Directors should encourage active participation of all shareholders at the annual general meeting. Yeah, but they're not going to encourage me with my 14 shares, are they? And if they do, does anyone have any questions? Yes, Mr. Chair, I've got 14 shares. Sit down. But we need to adopt all the recommendations of the combined code. It sounds like an excellent idea, but there can be problems. It's possible that the executive board could lack skill or experience. The competence of the board of directors is dependent upon the aggregate competences of the individual members. And if they're incompetent, you can't expect the board to be competent. Daily management team reports to the executive. If they do, the failings of the executive could mean that the problems which are reported to them by second-tier management are not fully appreciated, not fully understood. So here's me as a senior manager in the company. I'm reporting upwards to the executive board, but the executive board is full of incompetence. So it means opportunities could be missed, or threats could be overlooked. Directors may meet frequently and not necessarily close acquaintances, may meet infrequently, and they're not necessarily close acquaintances. The NEDs certainly will meet infrequently. The NEDs are independent people drawn from commerce, business, education, industry, people with proven skills and abilities. These are who the NEDs should be, and they're not necessarily going to be close friends. They will meet as a professional organisation for a NED meeting regularly, frequently, but last set of accounts I saw, there have been 6 meetings of the non-executive board. So it's only every 2 months that these people are meeting. The executives, the executive board, their work is a day-to-day basis. So the executive board of directors are likely to meet at the director's canteen at lunchtime. They may have a corridor and chief executives there and chief financial there and operations director there. And they may have a corridor of directors' offices. And are you going to tell me that they don't meet regularly? Executive board managers probably do meet regularly and therefore will more likely operate as a unit than the non-executives, who meet infrequently, probably forget each other's names between each meeting and have to reintroduce themselves. So you've got that problem. Could make it difficult for them effectively to question the daily management team. Chief executives are often people with forceful personalities. They sometimes exercise a dominant influence over the board. We're desperate to try and avoid that. We do not want the big bull elephant to be in a position to bully the rest of the board members. And the chief executive's performance is judged by the same people who appointed him. Who appoints the chief executive? Who? The directors, yeah, the directors appoint the chief executive. And if the chief executive is incompetent, that means that you have appointed me, and now you're having to admit that I'm incompetent. You're therefore having to make the admission that you've made a mistake. You were wrong, your error in judgment. And to admit that you made a mistake is a big step to take. Structure of the board. A structure of the board, 2-tier or 1-tier, single tier. The single tier characteristics. A supervisory board and a management board. Sorry, I'm a 2-tier or 1-tier. 2-tier or 1-tier. Both control and management are in the hands of a single group of directors. There's no distinction drawn. At directors' meeting, they all appear. Both executive and non-executive. It's just the one single board of directors. These non-executives, they don't have day-to-day involvement, but they are of the same status as the executives. They are directors. Common in the US and in the UK, a single-tier structure. The Combined Code recommends that at least half should be NEDs. I've said that before. The split of roles between chief executive and chair, I've said that before. The effect is to split management from control, I've said that before. In practice, NEDs not only monitor, but because it's a single tier, they also contribute to strategy. They're involved in the discussions carried on in the board meetings. In big companies, management is often devolved to subcommittees. And then the subcommittees will report to the main board. All directors, whether management or NEDs, have equal legal and executive status. They're all therefore accountable and responsible for board decisions. And I mentioned that before. NEDs can also take the initiative in management decisions. They're not simply restricted to post-decision approval. They can take the initiative. They can make the proposal. It's not just helping to decide on strategy, but they can introduce the concept of changing strategy. They can take the initiative for some strategic change. And all directors owe the same fiduciary duty to the company. Well, clearly they must do. They're directors, and directors are agents, and agents owe fiduciary duties. So no benefits, no undisclosed profits, operating and working to promote the success of the company. Those are the characteristics of a single-tier board. A 2-tier board is where we separate out the executive from the non-execs. The non-execs will be a supervisory board, hovering above, and leave the executives to get on with the day-to-day strategic decision-making, day-to-day decision-making. The executive board are there to run the company. The non-execs are there to operate in a supervisory role, in a controlling role, to determine that the decisions made by the executive are taking the company in the direction that we wanted. Because corporate governance, DASA, is defined as what? Corporate governance is defined as
System how company is managed and controlled.
a system whereby a company is directed and controlled. Yeah. So it consists of supervisory board and a management board. Apparently, companies in France, Germany, and other parts of Europe often have a two-tier board. What about your company? Do you have a two-tier board? No. Does yours? Neither here or in America?
I don't know.
You don't know? Any of your clients? Oldest, any of yours? Yanis? Roberts? Okay. We obviously don't know. Management is responsible for the general running of the business. The management is responsible for the general running of the business. The management board, led by the chief executive, and the supervisory board, responsible for appointment, supervision and removal, is led by the chair. Responsible for overseeing the activities and compliance. Compliance is a big issue. Law, regulation and the Constitution. Compliance, compliance, compliance. Somebody else is interested in compliance, aren't they? Who else is interested in the company's compliance with law, regulation and Constitution? Who else is interested in ensuring compliance with law, regulation and Constitution? We're fortunate to have with us today a number of members of the Big Four auditing profession, and any one of them will tell me who else is interested in compliance. I can ask somebody else, ask a non-auditor. Yes, the auditors, they're interested in compliance. All stakeholders are interested in compliance, but they can't actually get involved in it. Well, Sentosa House, Sonia did, didn't she? She got involved in it, or should have got involved in it. Yeah. Also, general overseeing of the entity and its business strategies, and it's led by the chair. The structure of the board. Take account of the following factors. An effective board is necessary. We need a balance between execs and non-execs, so that no group will dominate. In practice, I cannot believe that the executive board does not operate more effectively as a unit than the non-execs. I can't believe that the executive is weaker than the non-execs. But I don't know. I have no practical experience in this area. The board should not be dominated neither by any individual nor by a group. There needs to be a split of power between chief exec and chair. We've had that twice before. And exec directors should each be an expert in their own field. The executive directors, well, of course they are. You wouldn't expect the production director to be someone who's qualified in marketing. You wouldn't expect the marketing director to be someone who's qualified as a human resource person. So the execs need to be experts in their own field. Page 27, the executive directors involved in day-to-day. They're remunerated as full-time employees. They dedicate their working lives to fulfilling the duties as director. They take responsibility for the day-to-day running. It's the sort of person that was the only type of director when I was a student. Directors were directors. They didn't have these execs and non-execs. We didn't even have shadow directors when I was a lad, when I was a boy. Shadow directors didn't exist. Well, they did, but we hadn't recognised them. Non-execs, members of the board, not involved in day-to-day. They're neither a full-time employee nor connected in any other way. What's another single word that you can use to express nor connected in any other way? Independent, yeah. They bring independence. They bring an independent attitude, a new pair of eyes, a fresh pair of eyes, unaffected, unbiased, objective, pair of eyes to their position. And they serve on the various board subcommittees which I've already mentioned: audit, remuneration, risk, nominations, social and ethical. The function of NEDs. They're there constructively to challenge and contribute to development of strategy. There will be a question on directors. You know there's going to be a question on directors. There will be a question on directors in the exam. I'm not just going through these because we've got to go through them. It will be the case that there will be a question on directors. Maybe not a full question, but certainly part. They constructively challenge and contribute to the development of strategy. Oversee and evaluate management's performance in meeting agreed objectives. They're supervisory, they oversee, even if it's only a single-tier structure. Their role is to make sure that directors are sticking to their own established strategy. We determine strategy at a directors' meeting. This is where we want to go. This is where we want to be in 5 years' time. This is how we're hoping to retain our market share. This is what we're aiming to achieve. We can then pass it down to the managers and let them implement the tactics to achieve the strategy. But the non-executives are there to oversee and evaluate the management performance in meeting the agreed objectives. Satisfy themselves that financial information is accurate. How are non-executive directors going to satisfy themselves that financial information is accurate? You need to define accurate. How are they going to do it? Close liaison with the auditors. Satisfy themselves that financial controls and systems of risk management are strong and appropriate. How are they going to do that? Well, your close liaison with the auditors will be achieved through the audit committee. Satisfy themselves that financial controls and systems of risk management are strong and appropriate. What sort of committee might be involved in satisfying themselves that risk is being properly managed? The risk committee. They have a role on the remuneration committee. They constantly should be seeking to establish and maintain confidence in the conduct of the company. Promoting the success of the company is one of the elements in the statute law now in the UK. It's a director's statutory duty to promote the success of the company. They should be independent in judgment. They should be inquisitive. What's inquisitive? They should be independent in judgment. And they should be inquisitive. What's inquisitive? Does it look like it might come from the same word as inquiry? Mm-hmm. Inquiry, inquisitive. They should question. They should question. They should inquire. Why have we done this? Why have we not done that? How did we do this? How did we get into this position? What are you doing about? They need to be curious. Another word for it could be curious. Curious tends to be more retrospective. Inquisitive tends to be more prospective. But they need to be asking questions. They need to try to understand the views of the big investors, the institutionals. They're not going to try and understand my view. And they should be offered the opportunity to attend meetings with the institutional investors. The non-execs should be given the opportunity and should be encouraged to attend meetings with the big investors in order to find out what are the wishes of the big investors. We've got to keep these people happy. We've got to keep Sentosa House happy, because if we don't, then our own position as directors is then going to be in question. Because if Sentosa and the other one, 26%, vote against us and say, we don't want to reappoint you to the board, it's going to take a lot of votes just to neutralise that, let alone defeat it. It's going to take a lot of votes to defeat a 26% combined shareholding. So we have to keep the institutional shareholders. The institutional shareholders are after TSR. What's TSR? Total shareholder return. That's why they're invested in us. That's why any investor is invested in us. They're looking for total shareholder return. And an institutional investor which has got substantial overheads needs to make enough of a return to cover those overheads. So it's in their interests to have a substantial, good, effective total shareholder return. And they're only going to get that if the company continues in existence and is long term. And they're only going to get long term if the directors are controlled and the policies and the strategies are suitable and the company can continue and it doesn't fall foul of competitors and legislation and compliance problems. So only by keeping control of the directors, only by keeping them focused, are the institutional investors going to achieve their own objectives. And the only way we can make sure what the institutional investors' objectives are, is by trying to understand what their views are.